funded by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland with the television licence fee.
Situated just a stone's throw from Trinity College, Dublin, is Pier Street, Garda Station. Before Irish freedom was achieved in 1921, this police station was known as Dublin Metropolitan Police Station, Brunswick Street. During much of the Irish War of Independence from 1919 to 1921, it was the nerve centre of British intelligence in Ireland. More importantly, it was the workplace of Michael Collins's ace spy, Ned Broy. I recently met up with historian Paul Maher of the Garda Síochána Historical Society outside the station and posed him the following question. What is the significance of this building in the Revolutionary War period?
So during the War of Independence, Ned Broy was working for G Squad. He was in charge of a lot of the confidential files that were coming through G Squad offices. The political aspect of G Squad at the time was based in this office, and they would have been charged with responsibility of looking after information that was coming from sources within the IRA. Also British intelligence sources, the surveillance units that they had working in the city at the time, keeping an eye on IRA suspects. So throughout the War of Independence, this would have been a very busy office, and Broy, of course, would have been central to that because he saw a lot of the confidential files coming through. And this is the famous room that Michael Collins was brought into in April of 1919. You can see the circular room here. It wasn't the castle in the Michael Collins film. We get the impression that it's Dublin Castle, but it's actually this room here. So Collins was able to take a look through the files, but that for Collins wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing was learning from Broy. Broy was able to teach Collins about intelligence.
They say that if you want to win a war, then you first have to get to know your enemy. Ned Broy was the person who, perhaps more than any other, helped Michael Collins to know the enemy and ultimately defeat the British Empire. Paul Maher.
The importance of Broy and his skills and his expertise, it can't really be understated. He was able to pass that on to Collins. The IRA at the time, they knew of the importance of information, but they really didn't know how to get the information themselves and how to analyse it, cross-reference it. Broy was able to bring Collins into this office and show him how the DMP intelligence section worked, how interdependent it was with the British Secret Service, how interdependent it was with the RAC intelligence reports. He was able to tell him how to conduct surveillance. He was able to tell him how to target informants. He was able to tell him how significant information was, people, places, where the surveillance was being conducted on the IRA, where Collins should have the surveillance conducted on British suspects. I mean, it really was Broy who told Collins to take on the RAC and get them out of the smaller stations in the country areas to get them into the main centres, because without the information that came in from the RAC all across the country, it really paralysed British intelligence, and I suppose Broy was instrumental in formulating that policy for the IRA.
Without Ned Broy, Michael Collins' intelligence war would never have taken the direction it did, nor been as successful. This is Ned Broy's story.
The intelligence war was a very, very important part of the War of Independence.
Intelligence was absolutely at the base of a whole conflict.
Broy knew that information was power. Collins knew that information was power.
Collins learned from Ned Broy the tricks of the trade relating to using intelligence as a tool in the struggle for independence.
He very much tutored Collins in the way that the police system worked and the way the police mind thought.
Broy is particularly important in terms of helping Collins become this head of intelligence before he's effectively appointed.
He enabled Michael Collins to penetrate the heart of DMP intelligence and by virtue of that, British intelligence.
And before we hear more of Ned Broy's espionage exploits, first we investigate his roots. Broy was born in the year 1887 and raised in a farming family in Ballynure, near Rathangan, in County Kildare. Although he was christened Eamon, most everyone called him Ned. Michael T. Foy, historian and also author of the book Michael Collins's Intelligence War, the struggle between the British and the IRA, 1919 to 1921.
He was born in County Kildare, 1887. The atmosphere in which he is raised is certainly of a much less anglicised part of Ireland than, say, somewhere like Dublin. Kildare had played a role in the Rising of 1798, in which, incidentally, one of Broy's relatives took part in a battle close to where Broy was born. So his family certainly is of a nationalist bent of mind.
He was the eldest son of a farming family, and he would be required to take up the mantle of the farm. He decided that farming was not for him.
County Kildare historian Michael Collin.
He was very much interested in athletics. He was good at athletics, and he wanted to pursue a career in athletics. But in rural Ireland in the early 1900s, it wasn't so easy. He realised that if he had a position in Dublin where there was field tracks that he could train on, that would further his career. So he looked at the profession of the police. Now, the RIC was very unpopular in rural Ireland, but the police force in Dublin was the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and they were not as unpopular as the RIC. So he decided that he wanted a career in the DMP. So he joined the DMP in 1911 and was posted to Irishtown Police Station. Now, Irishtown Police Station was very close to Ballsbridge and Donnybrook, where there were field tracks. Of course, this was what Ned Broy wanted. So that's how he really got involved in the profession of the police at that time.
He progressed quite quickly in the DMP. He progressed from an ordinary constable to a detective in G Division. Now, there was 6 divisions of the DMP in Dublin, A to F. They were based regional, and at first he was posted in E, which is South Dublin.
John Dorney, independent historian and also author of the book Peace After the Final Battle, the story of the Irish Revolution.
G Division was the detective division. Mostly the detective division was involved in ordinary detective work, which is when a crime is not solved by the constable who reports it, it gets sent to the G Division office, which was in Exchange Street, then it was moved to Brunswick Street, which is now Pearse Street, and they had to investigate it. Now, under G Division, they also did political work. So this meant they followed mostly radical nationalists, also one or two others, but generally radical nationalists, took down their speeches, built up files on their whereabouts, and they were doing this even before the days of the Irish Revolution.
The Irish Revolution began in earnest with the 1916 Easter Rising. Ned Broy was working in Dublin during the Rising. Michael Collin.
When 1916 the Rising broke out, Ned Broy was a nationalist, obviously. He was in sympathy with the rebels, but he was infuriated that a rebellion had taken place because he knew they hadn't a chance. He was there working as a detective in the detective wing of the DMP, and he knew the strength of the intelligence and of the security forces at the time. So in the aftermath of 1916, and we know what happened, there was the executions which led to a change in attitude and a change in mood in the country. Ned Broy saw that, and then as the prisoners were released, he saw them reorganising. So he knew that there could be a chance here that these people might be successful. So he began to study revolutions, and then he realised that he was in a position that he could assist them. He was a detective. He had access to all the files of the Fenians and the files of the volunteers from 1916. So he made a decision that if there was any way that he could assist them by passing on information very, very secretly, covering his own tracks, that he would do so. and that would be in around late 1916 and early 1917.
And it's worth pointing out that at this early stage in the Irish revolutionary struggle, the physical foresight of the struggle was spearheaded by the IRA, which at the time was deeply embedded in the Irish volunteers. Ned Broy's first major success in passing information to IRA volunteer intelligence came in early 1917, when he helped to prevent the arrest of Sinn Féin leader Eamon de Valera. Michael T. Foy.
Broy was a desk man, but a lot of vital information passed across his desk. This is his superb value to the Republican movement. He sees reports, and one of the reports that he receives is that the arrest of de Valera has been authorised. Now, the last thing he wanted was for the British, once again, they had decapitated the leadership of the Republican movement in 1916, literally, in a sense, decapitated them by having them shot in front of firing squads. He could never rule out the fact that they would do the same to de Valera. So the last thing he wants is for de Valera to fall into British hands. So what he does, he gets a message via an intermediary to de Valera warning him that the British are out to capture him. Broy's intervention saved de Valera from going back to prison. So in a sense, he's putting down a marker. He gets away with it, and that increases his confidence. I can do this job.
Broy's next major success as a double agent came in early 1918, during the so-called German plot. The British government fabricated the German plot scheme as an excuse to arrest the entire leadership of Sinn Féin and the Irish volunteers. Ned Broy knew that a list had been compiled and secretly made a copy of it. Michael Collin.
The list was brought to Harry Boland, and Harry Boland brought the list to Michael Collins. Now, Michael Collins, as far as the detectives were concerned, they didn't know anything about him. He wasn't one that was regarded as being of any significance or as being in the leadership at that stage. Now, there was a meeting that night of the volunteers, the volunteer executive, and Collins produced the list.
He produces the list. How does it go?
They didn't believe him. None of them believed him. They had got tip-offs before, and nothing happened. And this was the entire leadership of the volunteers to be arrested. They just didn't believe it. Collins himself was not too sure either. Anyway, Ned Broy had given instructions to Pat Tracy to pass on this word to all of them not to stay in their places of abode that particular night.
And while Michael Collins and Harry Boland reluctantly acted on Broy's advice and evaded arrest by the British forces, many, such as Eamon de Valera, were captured. T. Royal Dwyer, historian and also author of the book Michael Collins, The Man Who Won the War.
The big thing is the main recognised leaders were rounded up, and then you had the likes of Michael Collins and Harry Boland on the loose, and they got control of the movement at this point, while de Valera was in jail.
And while de Valera might have got jail, Ned Broy knew that if ever he was caught helping the rebels, then it wasn't just jail that he'd face, but ultimately death by hanging for treason.
He was in a very exposed position.
In terms of exposing himself to risk, I couldn't understate how significant that was.
A very brave, courageous character who laid his life on the line, worked behind the lines.
For Broy himself, he risked all. He risked his future, he risked his career, because he had a greater calling, and his calling was for independence in the country.
He knew that he was placing his life on the line, and he wanted to meet Collins, because in a sense he was placing his fate in the hands of Collins. He wanted to see that just as he could keep secrets, he wanted to know if the man across the table, Michael Collins, was also a man who could keep secrets.
Historian Michael T. Foy. Eventually, in January 1919, Broy met the revolutionary leader Michael Collins for the first time in Foley's kitchen in 5 Cabra Road, Drumcondra. John Dorney.
He was immediately very impressed with Michael Collins, as a lot of people were. I mean, I think within the Republican movement, you either loved him or hated him, even well before the treaty split or any of that.
And it's important to stress that while modern history judges Michael Collins to have been an intelligence supremo, nevertheless, when Ned Broy first met him in early 1919, this wasn't necessarily the case. Seamus Cullen.
Let's go back to January of 1919. The War of Independence began in January of 1919, and Collins was in a leadership position at that stage. But Collins didn't really know anything about the area of intelligence. Collins was not really interested in the area of intelligence until he met Ned Broy. And let's put it another way. In January 1919, Collins was not head of the Department of Intelligence in the Volunteers. Eamon Duggan was. So Michael Collins just didn't wake up one morning, say abracadabra, I'm an expert now in intelligence. Take over the intelligence department and use it as a tool. It just didn't happen that way. He had to learn the tricks of the trade. And he learned the tricks of the trade between January and April 1919 from Ned Broy.
Before that, Collins had been going around in military-style uniform, volunteer uniform, or something like it, because this was the mentality of the volunteers. They thought that they were, and they believed that they were soldiers. And Broy told him not to do this. He says it makes you conspicuous, makes you an easy mark for a detective who's watching to spot you. He says, no, go around dressed like a businessman, go around dressed like a member, the Bank of Ireland. And that's what Collins did. He hid in plain sight. And, and there's many stories, some of them are apocryphal and some of them are true, where Collins has stopped and they said, oh, sorry, sir, but we have to stop everybody because he's looked like such a respectable businessman. And this is Broy's influence. The business coat, the trilby, the bicycle, which was a symbol of respectability back then, and the copies of the Irish Times and so forth,
John Dorney. And as was touched on already, the core of British intelligence in Ireland in early 1919 was the G Division political wing of the Dublin Metropolitan Police, which Ned Broy worked for. Seamus Cullen.
Michael Collins realised that the G Division would have to be defeated. And he wanted to find out what Ned Broy's views were on that. And to Collins' surprise, he discovered that Ned Broy was of the same opinion, that the only way that the nationalists could win in a physical force conflict was they would have to defeat the G Division, first of all, and they would have to defeat the RIC. But Ned Broy pointed out that the Dublin Metropolitan Police, the ordinary constable on the beat, were more nationalists than Collins realised. And he advised Collins not to make an enemy of the ordinary uniformed DMP. That if they were neutralised during the conflict, that it would be to their advantage. Because if you took the G Division out of the equation, well then you would have superiority in Dublin.
In effect, Ned Broy helped tutor Michael Collins in police thinking and also effective counter-espionage tactics.
He very much tutored Collins in the way that the police system worked and the way the police mind thought.
That period of 1918 to 1919 is absolutely crucial for the development of the career of Michael Collins.
Collins realised as well that he didn't have all the answers himself. He didn't have all the experiences. I mean, he was a raw recruit in the GPO in 1916, so he was very keen to learn from more experienced people and ask them questions and use them as his mentors to a large degree. So he was very good at that.
Martin Condon of the Collins 22 Society.
He knew himself that he didn't have all the skills, but he would use people who had the skills, and he'd work with those people and respect them and obviously learn from them. And clearly, I mean, people like Broy would have been a major influence on Michael Collins, without a shadow of a doubt. He respected him immensely. He was a key man for him.
Collins really understood the significance of the police through Broy. He was able to tell Collins how they're trained, how they think, what they're looking for, where the chinks in the armour were in the IRA, where it was under surveillance, who was under surveillance, the significance of particular people within the organisation, both in the IRA and in the British side. So Collins had a great source of information, but he also had a great mentor in how he could analyse that information and act on it. And that really is the crucial thing, how he could act on the information.
Paul Maher of the Garda Síochána Historical Society. Deeply influenced by Ned Broy, Michael Collins quickly realised that the only way that he could defeat G Division was to establish his own intelligence system. Seamus Cullen.
Now, at this point in time, in early January of 1919, Collins had many meetings with Ned Broy, several meetings in the week, and we can see what was happening. Collins was building up his information on and his knowledge of an intelligence system. He was creating his own intelligence system.
The IRA didn't create their own intelligence office. They didn't have the skills at the time, so they needed to import that expertise. And what better place to get it than from Ned Broy?
Michael Collins established an IRA intelligence office in Crow Street in the heart of Dublin City. Now, while Crow Street processed all IRA intelligence, Collins also assembled a group of hitmen called the Squad to rough up and, if necessary, eliminate G Division agents. Seamus Cullen.
Collins, he began setting up his own G-men, which was the Squad, and he had a staff in an office that were working full-time on intelligence. And while this was happening, he was meeting Ned Broy regularly. In fact, they were even jogging together on Sandymount Strand. Such was the friendship that was developing between the two at that time. But Michael Collins all the time was developing his knowledge of intelligence during those few months between January of 1919 and April of 1919.
Also, by April 1919, Collins and Broy devised an audacious plan that Broy would smuggle Collins, who by now was head of IRA intelligence, into G Division's top-secret files storeroom situated in Brunswick Street Police Station. Michael T. Foy.
Both of these men are risk takers. Collins and Broy knew that in the intelligence world you had to take risks. But if you were prepared to take risks, it was amazing what you could get away with. And for Collins, it must have been an irresistible opportunity to be admitted into the very centre spot of the intelligence system that he was about to attack, and just, in a sense, stroll around and see what was there. And he knew that if you were prepared to take a risk and acted confidently, you could get away with almost anything. So Broy invites him in at night, of course, into the headquarters of G Division. They make their way by candlelight to the vaults where the information is held.
Collins spent the night in there from 12 midnight to 5 a.m. copying the files, including the telephone conversations which were taken down between DMP detectives and the RIC, between, I think even British intelligence and the DMP. So, really valuable intelligence documents.
Michael Collins spent the whole night looking through the various files that the G Division had on the volunteers and particularly on the leadership. But also, most importantly, Collins wanted to find out the most efficient of the G detectives. Who was efficient at their work? And he also realised that those guys would not only have details written down, but they would have details in their minds, in their heads. And Collins was aiming to take those men out of it. And when he would take a particular detective out of it, there would be so much knowledge lost when that detective would go.
Collins, he's making notes, he gets an idea of what the British system is like, how they operated, he gets names of people, and in a sense, at the end of it, he's like a person who just, right, shuts the file, got it. That's all I need, I'm off.
I don't think it's unfair to say that the smuggling of Collins into Great Brunswick Street is the stuff of spy fiction.
Brian Hughes, historian with the University of Exeter and also author of the O'Brien Press 16 Lives biography of the 1916 rebel Michael Collin.
Imagine it's something that's not particularly easy, to do. Huge amount of risk involved, for Broy and for Collins, if Collins is caught in there.
The visit to the headquarters of G Division, in a sense, is Broy's supreme achievement.
To get that man in there, to go through the files, it was just an amazing feat.
It was very, very daring at the time because it was certain death for Ned Broy if he was caught and certain death for Collins if they were caught.
Ned Broy enthusiast Christy Burke. Here's the former Minister for Justice Michael McDowell.
It was pretty incredible that he managed to get somebody into the file rooms of British intelligence and just simply to go hunting for all the informers, all the intelligence.
He enabled Michael Collins to penetrate the heart of DMP intelligence and by virtue of that, British intelligence.
In a sense, what you have here is a political thriller, a heist. Go in, get the diamonds or the crown jewels, make off, get away, and they don't even know they're missing. That's the kind of analogy that makes this episode in G Division headquarters so eternally fascinating.
Well, Collins now had the information to take on the G-men.
County Kildare historian Seamus Cullen.
And he pinpointed the most dangerous of the G-men. And throughout the summer of 1919, the squad were active in assassinating the G-men. And throughout 1920, there were 3 G-men assassinated.
The first assassination is of G Division detective Patrick Smith in Drumcondra, but they certainly escalate after that. And then there's 7 shot in quick succession.
Historian John Dorney.
The man Bell, who's investigating the Dáil loan, he's shot down. But they certainly, there would have been detailed files on the movements of detectives. It would have enabled them to have been killed. And because this was not just DMP stuff, this was, RIC and British military intelligence, such as it was at the time. Actually, there wasn't that many of them in 1919 in Dublin. But this helped targeting of them all, without a doubt.
G Division detectives are being attacked. Some are being warned off. Some take the warning, some do not. Others are attacked. Some are wounded, and of course some are killed.
Historian Michael T. Foy. Here's T. Ryle Dwyer.
They're killing them one by one. There was no great confrontation as such. It was one at a time.
Again, it proves you the decisiveness of Collins, his ruthlessness and his clarity of vision. These were all factors driving him irresistibly to taking the offensive. He always believed in getting your retaliation in first. He was going to strike the first blow. He was going to attack G Division.
This certainly would have boosted the morale of the Republicans, that they were getting somewhere. And it undermined the intelligence of the British, because it put the fear of God into some of the people who were providing information, and it was a case of they decided they were getting out of Ireland rather than stay here if they had served the Crown as kind of providing intelligence type information. A lot of them fled.
Collins diminishes the power of G Division. The more detectives who are assassinated, the more that G Division is on the defensive and ultimately corralled into siege conditions, and its effectiveness pretty well all gone.
Collins successfully destroyed the G Division, such as it was.
And key to the IRA's destruction of G Division was Ned Broy, Michael Collins' ace double agent in G Division, Paul Marr.
Basically what Broy did was he enabled the IRA to have their own G Squad office, and it was that office and it was the skills that Broy was able to pass on that resulted in the intelligence successes that we read about today.
But it wasn't just the skills which Ned Broy passed on that were invaluable to Michael Collins. Also, he passed on much vital information on a continuous basis. Paul Marr.
The information that comes into Broy is coming from the DMP as well as the RIC. So he's getting copies of the information that's gone to the RIC office in Dublin Castle. And at this point in Brunswick Street, the intelligence is coming into his place and he's putting it into the one ledger. He's also getting the information that's coming in from the DMP notebooks. And that's going in. So he really has a central role in converging the two sets of information.
Bird's eye view, so to speak. What's going on in the intelligence landscape?
Absolutely, and he knows where he knows where the information is coming in from. He knows who's bringing it up. He's also able then to distill that information. I mean, a man with that power over that much information is somebody that you really want on your side,
And as prior speakers already touched on, by late 1919, G Division was rendered useless. The British authorities now tried to rectify this. Michael T. Foy.
The British decide to send in an outsider. It was a feeling that bring someone in, reinvigorate it, get them back in action, get them on their toes and get them out there on the streets going after Collins. And this person was an assistant commissioner called Redmond. He came from Belfast and he was sent in as head of G Division. And he said Broy and co were lined up there among others, and they're told by Redmond, we're not having this anymore, we're going after Collins and we're going to get him. And the private thoughts of Broy and co can be imagined when they heard that. They get the word to Collins, and again, it's golden rule, get your retaliation in first. He would get Redmond. And of course that happens in February 1920.
By 1920, with much of the power of G Division gone. Because Ned Broy worked in G Division, his power was similarly diminished. However, throughout the year 1920, he continued to put his life on the line by supplying vital information to Michael Collins, including for the IRA's Bloody Sunday operation on November the 21st, 1920. By the way, Bloody Sunday 1920 was the IRA's attempt to destroy British military intelligence in Dublin. Historian Seamus Cullen.
Ned Broy played a minor role in Bloody Sunday, and we know that Collins was gathering information on intelligence and on secret intelligence agents in Dublin at that time. And we also know that Collins was getting assistance from the ordinary DMP constables on the beat.
You have to remember that the DMP were largely sympathetic to Collins as the longer the war went on. The curfew that was introduced, of course, the average 5'8" DMP constable, he was able to tell the IRA office, the intelligence office, who was walking around Dublin at night, who had the passes, who were the guys with English accents, what houses they were going into, And from the Bloody Sunday point of view, that was crucially important. You had people like Danny Mannix and Davy Nelligan, and of course Ned Broy, informing Collins as to who these people were, where they resided, how often they'd been seen. And of course Collins made up his mind then.
Historian Paul Marr. Based on such crucial intelligence, Michael Collin's hit squad assassinated a dozen or so British intelligence and military personnel in Dublin. In retaliation, British forces indiscriminately shot dead 14 civilians in Dublin's Croke Park. So just how effective was Bloody Sunday as a military operation? Michael T. Foy.
Bloody Sunday is Collins's supreme intelligence achievement.
The mat had been pulled from under the British. The confidence they had, the security they had, the reliance on the population that they thought they had, it's gone at this stage. Everybody feels vulnerable. There's not a room to be had in Dublin Castle after November 1920. I mean, the roads are clogged with people trying to get into the castle for safety.
The psychological impact of something like Bloody Sunday was very important.
The British, they were in a shambles after Bloody Sunday.
It was a shocking event, but as a tactic of guerrilla warfare, very effective action.
On New Year's Eve 1920, less than 2 months after Bloody Sunday, Ned Broy's luck ran out when the British military raided the flat of Michael Collin's secretary Eileen McGrain and discovered documents passed on by Broy to Collins. Seamus Cullen.
This was devastating evidence which would lead the authorities to Ned Broy. Collins was told about it almost immediately, and within a day he had contacted Ned Broy and informed Ned Broy. Ned had known the consequence of it, and he thought about his options at that point in time. He had two options, either to go on the run, or the second option was to bluff it out. So he decided on the latter course. But in February of 1921, Ned Broy was arrested for passing on documents, secret documents, to the volunteers. And he was imprisoned in Arbour Hill Prison.
And he was put into solitary confinement. A solitary confinement is very, very difficult for people, you know. And if you're suffering at all from paranoia or anything like that, it exacerbates it.
Historian John Durney.
Look, one of the things that we need is human contact. If we don't have it, it tends to exacerbate anything that is preying on our mind. So this would certainly have affected him as well. I mean, Broy says in a statement that he tried to keep his mind occupied by exercising because he was a fairly decent athlete. He tried to walk up and down his cell, he tried to do push-ups, things like that. His trial was ongoing. They were collecting evidence, collecting witnesses. Some things were done by the IRA to intimidate witnesses. So how the trial would have gone, we'll never know. What happened was the truce of July 11th, 1921 came about.
In effect, the truce of the 11th of July 1921 between the IRA and the British authorities ended the Irish War of Independence, even though no one realised it at the time. The truce also saved Ned Broy from being tried for treason, found guilty, and then hanged as a traitor by the British. John Dorney.
One of the men, along with Sean McKeown and a number of other people, who Collins insisted would be released under the truce, because there was 6,000 internees in July 1921, and none of them were released until after the treaty, which is December 1921. One of the few men Collins insisted had to be released was Eamon Broy, Ned Broy, which again shows his importance. Like, Broy is not a minor figure in the Irish Revolution, he's a pretty important one.
When Ned Broy was released from prison, he went to work for Michael Collins as a member of his intelligence team.
County Kildare historian Seamus Cullen.
Then in October, the delegates were appointed to go to the treaty talks, among them Michael Collins. And Collins appointed Ned Broy as his personal secretary and bodyguard during the treaty talks. The treaty talks were held between October and December 1921. In 1922, Broy was appointed to a position in the new Irish Air Force in Baldonnel and given the rank of colonel. He subsequently returned to his old profession as a policeman, serving as a chief superintendent of the Garda Síochána. In 1933, he was appointed commissioner of the Gardaí. During the early to mid-1930s, he was in charge of an auxiliary force of Gardaí known as the Broy Harriers. They assisted the Gardaí during the Blue Shirt crisis in 1933 and a subsequent rent and rate strike, and also in curbing the influence of the IRA. Ned Broy retired as commissioner in 1938 and spent the rest of his active life involved in the promotion of sport. He served as chairman of the Irish Olympic Council from 1935 until 1950. He was also a fanatical supporter all his life of the Kildare Gaelic football team. He died peacefully in January 1972 and was buried in Cullygagan Cemetery, which is within sight of the Broy family farmhouse on the Kildare-Offaly county boundary.
In the annals of Irish history, Ned Broy is perhaps best remembered for his role as a double agent for Michael Collin during the Irish War of Independence, which eventually culminated in Irish freedom in 1921. So just how crucial was Broy's role? Paul Maher of the Garda Síochána Historical Society.
Absolutely essential. I mean, Broy's role, we can't quantify, we can't measure it. It's just so significant. We don't know how the IRA would have gone on in the War of Independence if it wasn't for the Intelligence Office. The main contribution to the success of that Intelligence Office is brought to the table by Ned Broy.
Really? You would consider him that high up on the echelon of spies in Collins' team?
Well, it's not just the fact that he was a spy, it's the skills that he brought. I have to keep coming back to that. He is the man who's given the expertise for that office to be so successful. They didn't have it elsewhere. They didn't have somebody that close to these intelligence reports. They didn't have somebody that central to British intelligence on a par with Broy. His contribution is absolutely huge.
I think he played a vital role in promoting the intelligence operations of Michael Collin.
Historian T. Ryle Dwyer.
There's the tendency to give Collins all the credit, but Collins was just the symbol that he got these people together and he used the information they were all providing. But the likes of Broy provided invaluable information and must have been very effective that he was allowed to provide it in the first place, that nobody seemed to suspect him for so long.
I think it's generally accepted that Ned Broy's activities really did keep Collins and his organisation safe, and therefore he was an absolutely crucial linchpin in the War of Independence.
Former Minister for Justice Michael McDowell. So where would Ned Broy rank in the list of all-time great Irish spies? Seamus Cullen.
Certainly up at the top. Certainly up at the top. He was Ireland's leading spy. The leading spy in Irish history.
In terms of the War of Independence and in terms of the Irish Revolution, he's right up there. There's no getting away from the fact that in a very crucial time, in 1918, 1919, early 1920, Broy is extremely important in terms of developing Michael Collins' thinking, in terms of developing his understanding of the intelligence system the British have.
Historian John Dorney. Here's Michael McDowell.
When you look at somebody like Ned Broy, he is the kind of person who stood shoulder to shoulder with Collins and took the immense personal risks to deliver on the substance of Irish freedom. And, he wasn't making speeches, he wasn't getting any awards, he wasn't getting any public recognition. He was a person who, if he was discovered, would have ended up dead in an instant, with nobody even acknowledging that he had ever existed. So, you have to take his contribution as ranking with the front rank of the fathers of Irish independence.
But when it comes to a spy, someone who would be working as a double agent, certainly Ned Broy is top of the list.
He's one of the greatest spies in modern Irish history.
Without Broy, I don't think that Collins would have achieved what he would have achieved.
Funded by the Broadcasting Authority of Ireland with the television licence fee.